Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest today is Ryan Marsh. He is the CEO of The Stack. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. What's the most interesting thing you learned about computing or anything in general? What's the most interesting thing you've been learning recently?
It's really just been some predictions coming true about, I really didn't expect it to happen this quickly. When I was younger, I saw that there was a lot of effort to make computers talk to each other and be able to share programs over the internet. I started looking into uh, different different ways of doing distributed computing in a business context. And I presumed that in the future that you would, and this sounds obvious today, but my assumption was that, or my prediction was that the way in which you interact with or think about, the way you conceive of all of the capabilities of a business and its offering would be through a programmatic interface. And that's just how we think of it. If there's anything you can do through the website, you imagine there's an API that you can hit that would also do all of those things. And then I thought, well, once that happens, then software development should go from the merely complex from merely complicated, bordering on complex to, in the traditional sense of those terms, to something resembling a complex adaptive system. And once we hit that there would be sort of emergent capabilities of the system like any complex adaptive system. And one of those emergent capabilities that we've seen recently are the training data and ability to for LLMs to interact with those APIs, and then eventually the thing kind of like gets a mind of its own and can do. We have the concept of a DAO, right?
Yeah.
The DAO is a precursor to what's possible, and I'm not the first person to say it out loud. But I really did not think it would happen this fast. It's like we jumped from AWS and hyperscale cloud vendors and the ability to deploy massively, scale horizontally and deploy massively complex systems very, very easily. Like with AWS Lambda, I can just write some code, or Cloudflare workers, I can just write some code, push it up. I don't have to think about it, all of the problems I used to have, but it can work endlessly with many other computers and at a global scale instantly. That's mind-boggling if you rewind yourself 20 years. Yeah, so I think that's really kind of where I'm at. And now what I'm trying to figure out is, okay, so this thing happened faster than I thought it would. It all came together. Now I'm trying to figure out, what do we do without programmers? Like, what does the modern company modern large companies have? Most people, I don't know how many people know this, but most large companies have very large software engineering departments. Because a company like Exxon can't just buy software off the shelf to do what they do, or even though you would think with as many very large insurance companies, you'd think that somebody would sell a package that would work for all of them. That's just not the case. They all reinvent the wheel. Every last one of them.
Is it all security?
No, not at all. It's just human nature. It really is just human nature. I mean, eventually, these software verticals are going to get annihilated by the capabilities of LLMs.
Yeah.
Anyone who does have a software vertical, they'll get annihilated by it, because I could come up with a novel business concept, like people have been talking about in car washes in the United States. are popping up in a lot of places because of a couple of changes in regulation, and then also because they're pursuing a subscription
Oh.
payment model. And yeah, so there's been a growth. There's been a growth in this for small businesses. Okay, so I just, because this is how I look at the world, I went inside the office and I was looking at the computer program they use, and it was terrible. It was horrendous. It was, some crappy vertical, and this guy's probably got a decent quarter of the market sewed up, who owns this package that runs these car washes. In a few years, somebody will be able to walk into that and be like, okay, Chat GPT, build me a system that can run my car wash.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you could have something novel on top of that. You could add whatever you wanted, and you destroy a whole software vertical that way. So if you imagine that writ large, eventually all of Adam Smith's, model of specialization all come true eventually. And and so what we're really seeing here is just physics play out.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the behavior of complex adaptive systems, you get hyper specialization and nesting within boundaries that filter information, and they all organize that way.
What does nesting in boundaries mean?
Well, so it's the opposite of the information landscape for voters today.
Hmm.
So so if you imagine how chaotic the information environment is for a voter in a democratic society, then, well, what's the solution to that? Well, the solution is I only need signals that tell me as an individual actor enough information so that I can make the decisions relevant to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're all voters in a democratic society, but we're not all
informed voters.
We're not all structural engineers.
Yeah,
So if you think about from that perspective, right? So from that perspective, if I'm just a structural engineer and I'm only working on, steel reinforced concrete buildings, and that's the only thing I work on, then it would really help me to just get the kind of information that will help me make good decisions in that area. And so if you look at the way that everything from cellular biology, the cell membrane has a wall around the cell has a wall around it, but there are ways in which things can pass through that cell wall, and that's how it signals to other things, and those other things get those signals. But those are within boundaries, within boundaries, within boundaries.
Yeah.
Like, so a red blood cell inside of a blood vessel, which is completely separate from the nervous system, which has its own set of pathways. There's a great book on this called Scale by Geoffrey West. I think it's probably, have you read Scale?
No, it sounds right up my alley. I'm gonna go get it.
It's a fantastic book, and he does a good treatment of complex adaptive systems theory in there too, just kind of offhandedly. I don't think that's the intent of the book, but I think he gives a good explanation of these, and so we're just watching this play out with compute, with societies. The funny thing is that when the cost of information transfer, like a bit of DNA or something like that, when the cost of information transfer goes to zero in a complex adaptive system, things get really weird really fast.
Yeah, it's gonna be
So
weird. And then what you mean by that is essentially like, well, information, I guess, so 100 years ago, if you wanted information, you'd have to telegram somebody. I guess if you had their telegram address or whatever, you could go, have a conversation with that person and get that information like 4 hours away or 4 continents away. And so information was really expensive, and then the internet made internet cheaper, one level cheaper. And then now with AI, it's like you can query the whole internet by just prompting it through an LLM, and it's even cheaper again. And then it's just going to get better and better and better. It's not only information, but knowledge as well too, because it's like when you're talking with the LLM, it's got a form of knowledge, not necessarily the best form of knowledge, but it's got a good form of knowledge. It's pretty impressive.
Well, we think about that in terms of in a utilitarian sense, but let's think about it culturally, right? William Gibson predicted the concept of flash mobs in, I don't know which book it was. It's been a long time, but today you can have a flash mob. The first sort of big example we all recall was the Arab Spring. Right? So an idea, like how quickly did the Arab Spring really come together in Tahrir Square?
Like a month, right?
It was really fast, really fast. How quick do these sort of memes or, sometimes the wokeness is called the mind virus. I think what you're seeing are the possibility of ideas, cultural things where, some esoteric Japanese subculture now, is like anime is a big part of American military culture now. Right? That's weird. Okay. It's weird. That's weird. So we see examples of this all over. And I don't just mean information in terms of bits. Like the pandemic could not have happened without jet travel.
Well, there's cultural evolution, and you're talking about information embodied in human also getting much faster through an airplane. And then when you said I'm not just talking about bits, I thought you meant cultural
that too.
Meme transfer. But that there's a connection there with the bits. It's so interesting, and it's happening really quickly, and now artificial intelligence is going to throw napalm on that, and I think both of us probably agree is that weirdness is not necessarily like apocalyptic or anything like that. It's just like going to be uncanny and really test our ability to stay grounded when weird stuff happens. What do you think of that?
I think it already is happening. I think we've already been tested. The Trump getting elected in 2016 surprised everybody, right? But if you look at it from if you look at just the fundamentals, if you look at it from first principles, and you look at the organization of society and how information moves and how culture changes and how old structures that filtered information worked in the past that aren't there anymore, those barriers are broken down.
Wait, what were those?
Traditional media.
Yes.
Traditional media, right? In my childhood growing up, there was three news channels on, right? And that's where you got it. That's where you got 100% of your information. That's what people around the water cooler were talking about at work the next morning, was what they heard from only three sources. Today, the Trump campaign spent $100 million on Facebook ads.
Interesting. In 2016.
There's a fantastic interview as part of a Frontline documentary, as part of Frontline, where they just interview Brad Parscale, and there's a long form of it. And I wish everybody would listen to that thing, because they basically I don't know if they were aware of just sort of how I'm looking at it, but they understood the basic laws and the shifts in the structures that filter or transmit information had changed. What we call networks in like an organism. So you can take that further. What naturally happens when there's this type of chaos in the system? Well, things start to break down. Old things don't work anymore. Old systems that relied upon signals of fitness don't communicate right anymore. Like if you inject an anabolic steroid into your body, you're essentially telling your body what to do, right? There's this information that's now coming to your body, and you're going to start gaining muscle mass and leaning out and so forth.
Interesting.
Well, but there are things that can break, right? Like your kidneys can get overloaded. They can go bad. So we're seeing natural outcome of these changes in society due to the ability of information to move very rapidly.
Yeah.
What will then happen are because you cannot exist. No system can continue to function in a with no prioritization, no filtering, no
Oh,
barriers for
interesting.
information. You have to have that. So what you'll naturally see are people slowly start to organize into subgroups. There will be,
Mm,
um, the famous Bridgewater Capital, what's this? Dalio likes to talk about this as the new, as a new internal order, a new world order. That's basically what you're talking about,
mm,
right? Is you will see countries become more nationalistic. You'll see within societies, you'll see new groups form, and they will, uh, um, who's the is it Naval? No, not Naval. Who's the guy that talks about networks?
biology.
Yeah, Balaji. Yeah. So, yeah, the kind of stuff that he's talking about, like that's
Yeah.
just, and I hate that Balaji is usually right. Uh, it, this is all just how complex adaptive systems work,
Uh,
and people can argue about it, and they can say, oh, they don't like nationalism or this, that, and the other. They really don't know whether they like it or not because of the information landscape. They really don't have their own unique ideas about it. But this is just the natural
hmm.
reordering of things. So whichever society can do this efficiently
Yeah,
and
interesting.
as effectively, the most effectively, will be the most productive and the most stable.
Yeah, and that's why I'm somewhat bullish on Argentina and still bullish on the United States as well, certain areas of the United States, just because we have a long tradition and system of uh, what do you call it? Federalism and laboratories of the states, even though that's been eroded over time. But Argentina in particular, also, I'm very bullish on because it represents it's been a laboratory here in Argentina since the 1950s and the 1960s. Like a lot of,
Sure.
I heard a great quote recently. It's a funny quote. It's like there are four types of economies: developed economies, developing economies, Japan, and Argentina. And
I like
yeah,
that. Yeah, right. Because
yeah.
Japan defies all the macro and all the macroeconomists. Yeah,
And
right. I love
does
it.
Argentina defy all the microeconomics? That could be very interesting because like
That's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, because that's what Milei is currently doing. Javier Milei is currently unwinding through microeconomics, and I'm learning a bunch as he's doing it. He's unwinding the last 40, 50 years of experimentation in this sense. And the interesting thing about Argentina in the 1960s it was an authoritarian government, but it was an authoritarian government who used the welfare state to increase its authoritarian power by handing out stuff, which is like a mixture of the right and the left in this really weird way that's Argentinian. And we're now seeing a lot of those things happen in the United States in terms of the investment. I'm sorry, in terms of the money printing and such at the national level. And it's like a strange mixture that that's like doesn't really fit into our normal political stuff, but Argentina does. Argentina has the one of the only kind of examples of it, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think to put this all in perspective, I think people need to think back to uh, Ukraine was the breadbasket of Europe,
Uh,
circa, shortly before World War One. I think people need, and I think it would give people perspective if they look at the structure of governments, mostly royalists, uh, in Europe at the time, pre-World War One,
uh,
and then they look at the industrialization and the impact of industrialization and since then, the drastic reordering and restructuring and uh, things that weren't even concepts that were popular are now essentially, major dividing lines politically today.
what do you mean? What's an
Um,
example of that?
um, uh, Free speech.
Mm,
I doubt that free speech was a major part of
Hmm.
oligarchic politics um uh in what would have been, France, Germany,
Yeah.
and
Austria.
Russia. Like
Yeah.
I just Austria, Hungary. Yeah, I just don't think that, or I don't know, uh quote unquote rights, like whether it's gay rights, trans rights, whatever, pick your subgroup, right? That type of something, small group rights,
Yeah.
like it's
Minority
just
rights. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, that concept is completely crazy
Yeah.
in that context,
Yeah.
right? And now you have this drastically different society is
Yeah.
organized drastically differently.
Yeah.
So I
Uh,
think that people should prepare for a drastic reordering of society, and I don't think I think people should hope that the Americans perform like they did
yeah.
in the jump during into Normandy.
Uh-huh.
I think the decentralized leadership and the performance, the concept of LGOPs, like little groups of paratroopers, is like just decentralization at its finest,
So
right?
my grandfather, he was one of those who jumped into France, and he it was really funny because he tried to join the U.S. Army before the U.S. got into the war because he's from Washington D.C. and but they wouldn't let him in because of something, and then he went to the British to see if they could join them while the British were already fighting, and so they asked him about his eyesight, and he's like, "Yep, eyesight's all good." There's like, "Okay, join the team." And so but he got experience in North Africa, but then once the invasion of France in D-Day, I believe, came around, he jumped in an airplane and he was first in line out of the airplane, and his commander says, okay, once you see a light, go ahead and jump. So he saw a light, he jumped, but it turned out
That
it
was the
was
red light.
no, it was the guy lighting his cigarette. Uh,
Oh,
and, and so the commander lighting the cigarette. So he jumped out of the airplane at pitch dark night in France and landed in
oh
the
God.
forest. And it was just like, oh shit, you're in for some trouble now. And I don't actually know what happened to that, but after that, but yeah, but so he was, and but I love that of the decentralization of um of paratrooper squads. Can you go more into why? Well, like let's talk about that from a computing angle as well, and like decentralization. I talk a lot about it, and I've recently come to hear about the distinction between decentralized and distributed um, computing. Uh, and you had mentioned distributed computing as well.
Hmm.
What's your take
Hmm.
on this aspect of what we're talking about in terms of information transfer and also software on the fly?
Well, so yeah, that's a good example. So I was a paratrooper as well.
Uh,
And so yeah, so you hear the lore of the little groups of paratroopers and so this is really interesting. The information landscape for paratroopers jumping into France during the D-Day invasion was really, really unique and interesting. So they you they were all briefed. They were as to, you're this group, this is your objective, you're trying to get here and you're trying to blow up this bridge, or hey, here's an artillery, here's some artillery over here, we want you to take out this artillery, on and on and on. So everybody knew what their mission was, and they ended up getting scattered all over the place. And little groups of paratroopers would just basically form up
hmm.
with whoever they ran into. They could be from completely different sticks, they're called it. And now it's nighttime. So how do you see some guys, some bushes rustling. How do you know if it's you or not, right? You can't yell out like, hey, right? Then, because if they hear an English word,
Yeah,
you're going to get sprayed with machine gun fire if it's not Americans.
yeah.
Um, so they had these little clickers that made like a cricket kind of a click
Oh, cool.
noise. And they would click those and they would click them back. And then you would know, like, oh, okay, yeah, these are probably Americans. And then they would form up, and then whoever was the highest ranking person in that small group would go about their mission.
Interesting.
So Yeah, yeah, it's really cool. Now, today, what we would expect is that uh, all of those individuals would have some form of communication at the
Yes.
individual
Yeah.
level of knowing where everything is, and it would be
Yep.
like watching pro esports from a commander's
Yep.
perspective,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um, so if you take that model and you put it in anywhere that constraint of information has or like a monopoly of information or
Oh, interesting.
channels of information, aggregation of information, you look anywhere that that's happening. Um, have you heard of aggregation theory
No, please
by
go into it.
okay, so aggregation theory is a principle by um I'm really bad with names. He's the guy who has the Stratechery blog.
Oh,
Of course,
Ben Patterson,
Ben Thompson.
Ben Thompson. Yep.
Yeah, aggregation theory. It's Ben, right? Ben Thompson. Yeah, that's right. Ben Thompson. So he talks about how markets will organize around aggregators, and then those aggregators will get commoditized or something will change, and then another aggregator will come along. I think there are going to be very few opportunities for
To
that
aggregate.
in future economies, and
Yeah.
I think probably
Huh.
I think we could all guess what the aggregator will be.
OpenAI.
It'll be LLMs like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
and
yeah.
they are incredibly powerful economically. Um, so there's an old saying
Huh.
in marketing that that basically if you and I'll destroy this, I'll really ruin this quote, but it's the person who acquires the customers is more valuable in business than the person who serves those customers.
Yeah.
So
Truth
if
on
I come to you tomorrow with 100 customers ready to go, and we can negotiate a price, and you're effectively buying revenue from me.
Interesting.
Now, once you have those customers, you have a much more complex problem to solve in running your business. But me bringing you customers, however I acquired those customers, that thing is free cash flow. That's why we saw Google AdWords grow like it did and produce the kind of revenues it did. That's why aggregators like Netflix have performed so well. And Ben Thompson goes into this. Well, an LLM, the people who control or own the LLMs these are going to be like the ultimate aggregators
It could be
in a
warlords.
lot of areas.
It could be warlords.
Uh, warlords.
Information warlords.
Yeah, I think of it more like he who controls the spice controls the universe
Yeah.
kind of a thing.
Yeah.
It's just yeah, that's like if you could, but technology does this, right? You have these crazy power laws in
Yeah.
technology where there's always this one major outsized uh, entity in the market that just owns the entire market, like Microsoft and desktop computing for a very long time.
Mm.
People sort of like looking back historically, they seemed completely insurmountable because the cost of building an operating system from scratch and then getting all the manufacturers to make you the default install on all these manufacturers seemed like for the longest time an absolutely economically impossible hill to climb for a new competitor. And then along comes Linux,
Oh,
right?
wait. What's the
So,
connection between Microsoft and Linux? That's an interesting one.
well, so Linux essentially coming into the server market as a free as a free
Oh,
replacement, they completely ate alive Windows and traditional Unix license revenue, and
oh,
that continued to fuel the development of Linux, which then led to what is now Android operating system, which makes it the most installed operating system anywhere in the world,
interesting.
right? But these are these trends. We see this one person come up. So I'm really not super worried about OpenAI. They'll
Yeah.
have a good decade, 2 decades, maybe even 3 of complete hegemony.
Yeah.
and then something else will come along. That's just the way that works.
Yeah, and it feels like it's gonna get really sci-fi with the quantum stuff coming down the pipeline, and just LLMs themselves are already pretty sci-fi themselves. And then we got computer vision models too. I would love to talk about quality assurance, QA, because you had mentioned that that's your business. Can you talk more
Yeah,
about
that's our business.
what you do with that? And then later I want to talk about how AI is going to play into that.
Yeah, so the I guess it's kind of funny. QA has been a backwater. Quality assurance for software has always been a kind of a backwater. Software engineers have always kind of looked down on it as like,
Interesting.
good software engineers don't go into QA and things like that. Which is really funny because I don't know what most software engineers would do if they didn't have really,
Yeah.
really good, testing discipline, or a QA department. They seem to break things. There's an old joke. A tester walks into a bar, orders one beer, orders 99 beers, orders negative 99 beers, orders A B C D F G beers, right?
Yeah.
And it makes every programmer cringe because they're like, oh yeah, like I've seen somebody do that to my code. So where we're focused though is on tests as the Rosetta Stone for understanding the behavior of a system. And if you can involve the stakeholder and the engineers and then someone who is quality minded, and you can engage them in a conversation where we basically craft our specification for the behavior of the software as a set of tests. That is probably the easiest and most productive way to get a cross-functional group of people on the same page, using the same terminology, understanding everything the same way. Instead, what we do is we say, hey, this stakeholder is going to communicate to me in their own language. I, as a person, as a software engineer, I'm going to try to interpret that, and I'm going to try to just put that into code and I'm going to impart my superior, logic into this inferior logical machine called a computer. And then this other person's going to come behind and check me because I might make a mistake, right? And that's how we think about it.
Yep.
And that couldn't be farther from the truth. That couldn't be farther from reality. That's not how it actually works. And that's where most of the problems originate, because the quality tester minded person has their own interpretation of what the stakeholder said and what the stakeholder wanted. Yeah, and the engineer, and then when you have, I have this nice little Venn diagram I show people, and you have like when the software engineer and the tester agreed, but it had nothing to do with what the stakeholder wanted. You just have a bunch of, now you just have all this complex behavior that doesn't even need to exist and provides no business value whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
Or you have tester and the tester and the stakeholder are in sync, but the developer's not. And so now you just have a bunch of failing tests. Or sometimes, you have the tester just had their view of the world, and it wasn't what the business wanted, and it wasn't what the software engineer had in mind. So you just have a bunch of failing scenarios like that just serve no purpose. They're just a bunch of bugs, essentially. Or the stakeholder feels like they expressed what they wanted and they didn't get it across to either of them, and so they just have a bunch of unrealized hopes and dreams. And the worst of all is when the software engineer builds something that they thought somebody wanted, that the tester doesn't test and the stakeholder never wanted. That's 90%. That's probably 90% of the unnecessary complexity in your code base comes from that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have an approach to that. We draw from older practices that are not very they're not very well understood, but they're relatively popular concepts like behavior driven development. We draw from that. We use some collaborative activities like event storming and example mapping and things like that to bring everybody into a shared understanding up front. We specify it in terms of test cases, which sounds very boring, right? But it doesn't have to be. You can write them in something that's very close to natural language. And then so here's where it gets interesting. And then today we can use tools like, there's a popular software testing tool that will take English, specifications written in many languages, structured in a certain way, and connect those statements to automated tests, just functions, individual functions in your test code. One of those tools is called Cucumber. It's quite popular. People can look it up. It's a great tool for doing this. What happens when I have an LLM that can write code, and we have this common sort of pattern of structuring the specification in the sense of tests, just written out in natural language or something close to it? What happens when I bring an LLM into that world? Well, that is much more conceivable for for a stakeholder to talk to a computer and have
they cut out the middleman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to upset anybody, but professionally in our consulting and everything that we're doing, we are trying as hard as we can to get away from individual contributors. And that's probably going to upset people, and somebody's going to interpret it the wrong way. Yeah, I really think now the good news is there's enough business out there that software engineers are
interesting. Yeah,
there's a lot of software that needs to get built, and you're going to need them to guide and use these co-pilots to get more work done. And we're already seeing massive performance, software development performance, software delivery performance numbers in large companies that can't afford great talent. We're already seeing big boosts from things like pilot. Oh yeah, we're seeing huge boosts already. But eventually that's going to get saturated, and the tools are going to get better and better. And what you're going to have are a few key leaders that have domain knowledge, and they're going to be speaking to a handful of expert humans and, LLMs. And they're going to be, and so they're going to have an interesting job ahead of them, as the same way that I used to maybe, in Mad Men, 1960s Manhattan advertising, I'd shamelessly flirt my secretary and then ask her to book me in a meeting with such and such, where I, do the old boys network thing, right? I'm not going to be able to take away. Now the email took away a lot of the secretarial roles.
Interesting.
Right. So I'm going to lose a lot of staff. I'm going to be empowered with technology, but I'm going to have a lot of stuff to juggle. And I want to give you one anecdote for this. So I was at a very, very important financial institution. It's government affiliated. And this is several years ago. This was shortly after the 2000, I guess this would be about 2015 or so. And these guys have a lot of software that runs some very important markets in the US. And the economy runs on them. If these markets don't work well, the economy crashes. Okay. And it has happened because of, okay. So I was in a room with a bunch of leaders and software engineers and all sorts of folks. And I asked them, how many people would we need to just have the domain knowledge of what the software should do? Like, in this entire organization, how many people would we need to just have the brain trust for 100% of the domain knowledge in this organization? Okay.
Yeah.
This is back in 2015. They said, it would probably fill this conference room. It was an ordinary size conference room.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so, exactly. So when you take but they had an army of software engineers, army of testers, army of infrastructure folks, ops, all that.
And
that's what you're looking at.
The domain knowledge is such an interesting piece. And it reminds me, I've been in these it's not an existential battle, but it's a, what is it? It's like a Kafka-esque, yeah, it's a Kafka-esque battle with
Yes.
insurance agents, an insurance company, a mortgage company, and my bank. And I'm trying to get a payment. I just had to send another email today. It's been a year and a half or a year and a couple months since my roof collapsed. It was fixed only 9 months late. But now I can't even make the payment from the insurance company to the thing. And so I won't go into the crazy story, but except for saying that, I'm down here in Argentina and I'm making payments via crypto immediately, and I'm getting cash immediately, and there's like no problem whatsoever making payments. But back home, because of this just Kafka system, and a lot of that Kafka system is simply because one person has their job, which is moving this envelope to that place, over from here over there. And like they will protect that job no matter what. And so all those companies with the protected jobs just have so much money, it's going to take them a while to run out. And they've got the regulation piece, which is keeping them afloat. But then for all the other businesses, they're going to have to face what you just described. And so it's going to be an interesting thing. There's going to be one part where it's not competitive at all because of a regulation. And then it's going to be another place where it's going to be competitive and lean, very lean companies from now on, it seems like. What do you
Incredibly lean. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you're going to be looking at Instagrams. I think when
Yeah.
System sold Instagram to Facebook, they had what, like 30 something employees.
Yeah.
I think you're going to be looking at traditional businesses that are huge, like a massive insurance company that maybe has 30 employees. I think you could actually see that.
Interesting. Yeah.
I just don't see evidence of why. And let me give you another just sort of broad set of all these. I have several anecdotes like this, but I've traveled the country, helping companies of all different types with the efficiency of their software development processes. And I've seen how the sausage gets made in a lot of companies, and I'm very curious about what people do for a living. So I would meet subject matter experts and stakeholders and so forth, and I'd ask them frequently, like, "So what do you do? Like, tell me about your job." And I'm genuinely curious and really interested. I would say conservatively, um, half of office jobs, white collar jobs, could be easily automated away today with minimal effort and existing tools, um, in just a matter of a few days worth of work. If those companies could just get their shit together with their software engineering practices and the way they make decisions about technology, a good 50% of white collar jobs could evaporate tomorrow. This is not with new technology. This is with technology that's been around.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
So I want to take it a step further. I believe, and this is not very controversial amongst my colleagues who've been on these projects with me, that with a little more application of effort, this is prior to LLMs even existing. 80% of those white collar jobs could be developed away with a 6-month software project,
Yeah.
like the remaining 30%,
Yeah.
right? So I just don't think people really, like, we talk about like AI is going to take our jobs. I mean, yeah, so people don't raise cattle like they used to and do, that's very, it's
Horses.
very
Yeah.
it's very, yeah, or horses,
Yeah.
it's very
Yeah.
optimized, so they do
Yeah.
other things. We'll find other things to do. That's just how humans are.
Yeah.
But um yeah, the work landscape is going to change drastically. Some companies are going to get very, very lean,
Yeah.
but what will bring it will be tragedy, because you're not going to convince a VP to cut their headcount is their
Yeah.
power.
Yeah. Yeah. And their
You're
budget.
not going to
Yeah.
convince
Yeah.
a VP to cut
Yeah.
their staff by, down to just a skeleton crew willingly. So what will probably have to happen, just like COVID accelerated the digitization, digital business, um, and suddenly all these companies moved to remote work and they finally got their Office 365 projects, migration projects finished in
Yeah.
about a month,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They could have done it prior, they just didn't want to. Now they did it. You're going to see another sort of set of tragedies like that, like very big disruptions happen, and then companies will
It'll be new entrants, right?
very quickly. So I think this no, not necessarily.
I can explain more.
Being okay with dying slowly like Kodak. You got me?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, sorry.
No,
Yeah,
no.
companies are okay with a lot of companies are okay with dying slowly, like Kodak did.
Okay, interesting. So
Yeah,
last,
it really takes like a extreme disruption. And the downside is a lot of people saw their jobs, which were already obsolete, get laid off or changed during COVID and not rehired.
yeah,
Right. And that was during a tragedy when they needed money most. And that's what's going to happen to a lot of people. I can't predict what that tragedy will be, what that big disruption will be. But when that big disruption happens, a lot of people will be left in the cold without, there's not a gradual, that's how, that's how these phase shifts happen. What do they call it? A punctuated equilibrium. That's how these punctuated equilibriums happen, right? It'll be little by little and then all at once.
yeah.
Yeah. So
And
that's what people need to be looking out for.
yeah. And yeah, we probably run out of time. This has been a great pleasure. How can people find out more about what you're working on?
They can hit me up at thestack.io, and you can always email me at Ryan at thestack.io.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, buddy.